You are listening to The Holly Hall Show. Every week, Holly will discuss global news, her unique views, interview amazing guests, and often with an astrological twist. Holly has over 7 years experience as a talk show host and 23 years experience as an astrologer and dream analyst. Sit back, relax, and enjoy another intriguing and informative hour here on A to Zen FM. Now, here is your host, Holly Hall.
Hello, everyone. How are you today? I was hoping to hear the song, What's Love Got to Do with It? We had it queued up, but we'll play it in the next break. Because today we are talking, I know I don't sing it as good as Tina Turner, sorry. I don't have her legs either. Today we're talking to the most amazing guest. I am so excited. I first discovered her on TED TV. If you've got the internet, you can go to tedtv.com, I think, or it's ted.tv, either one. All you have to do is Google TED TV and you'll find it. That's where I first discovered her, actually on Netflix, though, so I watched her on the big screen. And you're probably wondering who she is. It's Helen Fisher, Dr. Helen Fisher. Most of you know how passionate I am about love and relationships, especially when I talk about astrology. You know I have a psychology background and a philosophy background, and everything that Helen Fisher is about, you can find her at helenfisher.com, I resonated with. I was just like, I fell in love with her because she has many books as well, too. Now, I want to give you a bit of a sneak peek of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about why we love, the nature and the chemistry of romantic love, and ever wonder why him or why her. She wrote a book, Why Him, Why Her. Have you ever wondered why? She's featured on Oprah Magazine, National Geographic, Today, Time, Psychology, Today, TV, TED TV, and Helen E. Fisher, PhD, biological anthropologist, is a research professor in the Department of Anthropology. Boy, I've got a tongue twisters at Rutgers, or it might be Rutgers, I'll have her correct me, University. She has written 5 books on evolution and the future of human sexuality, monogamy, which we're going to talk about, adultery, and divorce, which I find very fascinating, gender differences in the brain, the chemistry of romantic love, and most recently, human personality types and why we fall in love with one person rather than another. In fact, if you go to her website, helenfisher.com, you can do a little test on who is the right one for you. She talks about lust, the sex drive, the libido, romantic attraction, romantic love, attachment, deep feelings of union with a long-term partner. Now, without further ado, I want to bring on Helen Fisher because I know 55 minutes is not going to be enough to talk about this interesting topic. Hello, Helen. How are you today?
I'm just fine. How are you?
I'm great. As you can see, I'm quite passionate about your work.
Wonderful. Well, so am I. It's a good topic. It's evergreen.
It is, and I want the audience to get a little glimpse inside of the mind of Helen Fisher. So outside of the educational PhD Helen Fisher, just to find out how you got to the passion to get where you are today, even before you even started educating yourself on this subject. Is there anything personal, you growing up, your childhood, your teenage life, or early adulthood that brought you to the point that you are right now that you're passionate about?
Oh, Holly, well, all kinds of things, I'm sure. But, looking back on it, I think probably the most, I really deal with how we're all alike. I mean, I study things like romantic love, and you find it around the world. The sex drive, you certainly find it around the world. Deep feelings of attachment, the drive to form pair bonds. These are things that we all experience. They're deeply embedded in the human brain. And I think probably I'm interested in why we're all alike because I'm an identical twin. And as a small child, twins always get the same questions. I mean, do you have the same cavities in your teeth? Do you have the same friends? Do you like the same food? Do you have ESP? do you think alike? And so long before I knew there was any issue about the nature-nurture controversy and how much of your behavior was learned and how much of it was biological, I was very busy, even as a very small child, sort of trying to figure out how much of my behavior I shared with my identical twin sister. And so it was very natural to me to think about those parts of human nature that we share, all of us together. And I think that's what drove me. And then again, of course, I was a teenager. I was a teenager like all teenagers, and I was very interested in sex and love. And when it came time to write my PhD dissertation, I felt that, our human patterns of sex and love would be most likely to have evolved and have a strong evolutionary and genetic component because, if you don't fall in love and if you don't have sex, you're not going to have babies and you're not going to pass your DNA on to tomorrow. So I basically figured that if I studied romantic love, deep feelings of attachment, evolution of pair bonding and monogamy, those were the kinds of things that I would find evolutionary explanations for and things that we all shared. So I think just those two things, the fact that I was a basic teenager interested in sex and love, and I'm an identical twin.
So did you discover what the difference was between you and your sibling, or what the similarities were between you and your sibling, if there was any?
Oh my goodness! I've never met two people who are alike. There's no two people on this planet that are alike. Even identical twins are not alike. And sure, I think my clearest understanding. Her name is Lorna, and I'm Helen, and I think my clearest understanding of some of the differences and similarity actually comes from my newest work, because in terms of romantic love and sex drive, we're very similar. But my newest work, is in the study of personality, and there certainly are some differences. But here's the way we're both alike. I've written 5 books. I'm an anthropologist. I spend a great deal of time in the lab and writing books and reading. And she's a hot air balloon pilot, and a painter. So she gets up at 3 a.m. and checks the weather, and then brings people up into a tiny little basket in Aspen, Colorado, or in Switzerland. And so it looks like we're very different in terms of what we do every day.
Absolutely.
But the similarities are that we can both tolerate risk. I walk on national television and talk about the evolution of adultery, and she takes people up in a tiny little basket. So we can both tolerate risk. There's a real psychological component in what I do, trying to understand why you fall in love with one person rather than another. And of course, as a balloon pilot, she's got to really cope with people's fear in the basket, et cetera. So we're similar in our ability to tolerate risk. We both have a tremendous sense of adventure. We both have gone to a lot of countries around the world, just hanging around to see what's going on. We're both enormously curious. We're curious about the same kinds of things. We both love the theater. We both love biography. But we're also very curious about different things. I mean, I put people in brain scanners, and she's an artist who interviews natives in the jungles of Amazonia to find out what's driving them to be artists themselves. So basically, we're both curious, but we seem to be curious about often different things. We're both adventurers, but we adventure in different ways. We both have the same sex drive, but yet we choose different kinds of men. We both work alone. We both. She's a painter, so she moves tiny little brush strokes around for hours and hours, and I'm a writer, so I move tiny little words around for hours. So basically, it looks very different, but some of the temperament is very similar.
Yeah, it does. I can definitely hear the similarity too. I mean, obviously you're both driven and you're both authentic to yourselves. You've both pursued what you wanted for yourselves.
That's wonderful. But I actually didn't list those things. That's good. I thank you.
No, I can see all
we
of
are
that.
authentic to ourselves. Neither of us work in an office where
what Mom and Dad
not that those people. Pardon me.
Or what Mom and Dad said you should do.
Yeah, well, actually, they were adventurers too, so that really wasn't a problem. But neither of us work in a hierarchical environment like the office, where there's very set jobs and set time you're supposed to show up and set kinds of things to wear, and with a level of command. Neither of us did that. We both work for ourselves. We both made our own living. Rather than marrying well. Not that isn't a good idea, but we didn't happen to do that. And so, yes, I would say that we are authentic to ourselves. That's a lovely idea. Thank you.
You're welcome. So I wanted to talk to you about the video. This is what I mean, the speaker corner, I guess, so to speak, that you did on TED TV, which was February 28, 2008, which was the brain in love. And
Yeah.
I found it very interesting. You named 3 specific parts of the brain in love. And I'm wondering if you could visually give my audience what you were talking about that day and the 3 different, you might have more, but I remember 3 different aspects you talked about the brain in love. One of them was
The sex drive.
The sex drive and the desire.
Yeah.
I think you compared it to wanting a piece of chocolate and
Right.
that type of thing. Yeah.
I think that we've evolved 3 distinctly different brain systems for mating and reproduction. One is the sex drive, the craving for sexual gratification. The second brain system is the brain system for romantic love, that elation, the giddiness, the euphoria, the obsessive thinking, the craving, the possessiveness for a particular individual. And I think that the third brain system is deep feelings of attachment, that sense of calm and cosmic union that you can feel for a long-term partner. And I think that these 3 different brain systems evolve for different reasons. I think that the sex drive evolved to get you out there looking for a whole range of partners. I mean, you can feel the sex drive when you're just driving along in your car. It's not necessarily focused on anybody, or when you're
I don't
reading
need a partner.
good book.
Yeah.
Or watching a movie. But I think romantic love evolved to enable you to focus your mating energy on just one individual at a time. That's a very focused thing. I mean, you can't be in love without being in love with somebody. And I think the third brain system of attachment evolved to enable you to tolerate this human being, to stick with them at least long enough to raise a child together as a team. So I think we've all evolved all 3 brain systems. I and my colleagues have now put almost over 75 people into a brain scanner and studied the brain circuitry of romantic love, the second of the 3 brain systems. Other people have studied the brain circuitry of the sex drive. And I've written actually whole books on the evolution of attachment, that third brain system. But what we're really known for is having put over 75 people who were madly in love into the brain scanner. And the first group were 17 people who had just fallen happily in love. They were very happily in love. The second group were 15 people who had just been rejected in love. That was hard. Oh, boy, they're really struggling. And a third group were men and women in their 50s and 60s who maintained, all married an average of 21 years, and all maintained that they were still in love with their partner, not just loving them, but in love with their partner. And we put them in the brain scanner, too. So we've gone on now to study newlyweds, and we will continue to study older people, et cetera. But we're trying to map the brain circuitry of one of these 3 brain systems, the basic brain system for intense romantic love.
So is there a difference between in love and romantic love? Do you have to have romantic love to be in love?
I think
Can
they're
you have
the same
romantic
thing.
love and not be in love?
I think they're basically the same term for different terms for the same thing. I think infatuation, if you actually look up the word infatuation, it describes the intense feelings of romantic love. I think being in love, passionate love, romantic love, and infatuation are all basically the same brain system. And there's a certain number of characteristics of it. I mean, the first thing that happens when you fall madly in love with somebody is that person takes on what I call special meaning. George Bernard Shaw once said, he said, love consists of overestimating the differences between one woman and another. And indeed we do. Suddenly, every single thing about them is special. I mean, their car is different from every other car in the parking lot. The house they live in, the street they live on, the clothes they wear, the music that they like, the books they read, the job that everything about them is special. Mm-hmm. And then you focus on them. And this is the dopamine system in the brain. You focus on them. Before I put people in this brain scanner, I would ask them, what do you not like about your partner? And they could list what they didn't like, but then they would sweep that aside and just focus on what they did like. And also other traits are intense energy. You can walk all night and talk till dawn. Excuse me. You feel elation when things are going well, mood swings into terrible despair when things are going poorly, incredible possessiveness. I mean, when you're just casually sleeping with somebody, you actually don't really care if they're sleeping with somebody else. But when you're in love, you care big time. A real separation anxiety. You don't like to be apart. But the three main characteristics of intense romantic love are craving for emotional union. Yes, you like to sleep with them, but what you really want is for them to call, to write, to invite you out, to tell you that they love you. So craving for emotional union, intense motivation to win this person. What people will do when they're in love is incredible. And last, but by no means least, obsessive thinking. There's somebody camping in your head. You can't get them out. You wake up in the morning thinking about him. You go to bed thinking about him. You are obsessed with them.
But isn't this normally characteristic of the first stage of long-term love? Or did you actually find people have this for like 20, 30, 40 years?
Mm-hmm. I had thought that this would be the first stage, and so did my colleagues. Mm-hmm. But these people who were in their 50s and 60s maintained that they were still madly in love with their partner. So we put them in the machine. I mean, we just wondered what they were talking about because mm-hmm. all of our textbooks believe that, this early stage intense romantic love dissipates. So we put them in the machine, and sure enough, we found some differences, but we found a great many similarities among their brains and those brains of people who had just fallen madly in love. And the similarity was we found activity in a tiny little factory near the base of the brain that actually makes dopamine and mm-hmm. sends dopamine to many brain regions, giving you that elation and the focus and the energy. The difference was that among those who were in love long term, they no longer showed activity in a brain region linked with anxiety. When you've just fallen in love, you're anxious. I mean, you keep thinking to yourself, what did I say that for? Should I have called back? Am I too fat? Why didn't I do that? You're anxious when you've just fallen in love. But in those who are in love long term, and of course in a long term marriage, that activity had now ended, and instead we found activity in a brain region linked with feelings of calm. So I think what's going on in these long term people who report they're still madly in love, They don't talk about divorce. They say they're in love. They're looking forward to having their partner come home for dinner. They want to share their day. They want to go on vacation with this individual still. They admire the person still. Most of the time they're crazy about them, and they're still in love with them and also feeling a deep sense of attachment and, of course, all the sex drive. Also the sex drive. I mean, I think basically what we want is all three in a partnership. We want to continue to feel the sex drive, continue to feel at least episodically or periodically those feelings of intense romantic love, and also continue to feel a deep sense of attachment to this individual.
I'm wondering, when did you do this test?
I've been doing it since 1998, so it's been many years. This is no joke. I mean, getting people into a brain scanner is no joke. Creating what they call the protocol, the design of the experiment, and then analyzing the data. I'm an anthropologist, and it's my neuroscientist colleague and friend Lucy Brown up at Albert Einstein College of Medicine, who actually looks at the brain scans and tells us what we've found. But it's a team effort, and we're the first in the world to look at this. It's so interesting how I think of all of these brain scanning studies that I've done, the most important to me is what we understood from those people who had been rejected in love. It's amazing how the media has not picked up on that data the way they've picked up on those who are happily in love. And as far as I'm concerned, when people are happy in love, that's nice. I mean, it's entertaining and it's nice. But what's really but what's really serious is when they've been rejected in love. I mean, that's when you've got people who are stalking, clinical depression, suicides, homicides. That, I think, is more important data.
And that's interesting that you mentioned that, because one of the things I want to talk about, and that's why I asked you when you had done the test, is that I think in this world, and you're the expert, but not in this world, but in this day and time, many of us are dopamine deprived. I think it's the stress, the world that we live in. You had mentioned certain drugs that you take can make you dopamine deprived. Possibly the foods and the chemicals in our foods are dopamine deprived. And you had said that romantic love the dopamine is very much involved in that feeling of feeling romantic love. Now, if we're in a society now where we're dopamine deprived, first of all, have you recognize that or notice that, or what do you have to say about that? And second of all, what do you do about it? Because it may be in us, but we just don't have the dopamine.
That is really smart and really important. And actually, I did 2 TED Talks, and in the first one, in the 2006 one, rather than the 2008 one, I actually talk about that. Because when you take Prozac or Paxil or any of these newer serotonin boosters, you're driving up the serotonin system, and as you drive up the serotonin system, you are jeopardizing the dopamine system. They've got a negative correlation, serotonin and dopamine. And my hypothesis is that a lot of people who are taking these serotonin boosters are actually dampening or jeopardizing their ability to fall in love and stay in love. Now, there's an awful lot of people who actually need these drugs to get out of bed in the morning and to sustain a relationship. I'm not talking about them. What I'm referring to is a Harvard psychiatrist recently said that something like 73% of Americans who are taking serotonin boosters, SSRIs, don't really need them. And those are the people that I'm concerned about, because what these people are doing is jeopardizing their ability, I think, to fall in love and stay in love. I haven't done the academic work on it, but it's well known in the academic literature that when you drive up the serotonin system, you are jeopardizing the dopamine system. And certainly our data on the brain shows that it is the dopamine system that becomes more active when you fall madly in love. And as a matter of fact, I wrote an article on this for a book that was published by MIT Press, and since then, it's sort of gotten around the world, and every couple of weeks or so, I get an email from somebody, and this is the kind of email that I get. This one happened to be, I think, from somebody in Holland. It's hard to tell with an email, but he was from Holland. It was a young man. He said he had just fallen madly in love with a young woman. They had lived together for, 7 or 8 months, and he was doing very poorly in school. So they put him on a serotonin booster. And not only did he lose his sex drive, which is very well known when you take these drugs, but he fell out of love with the girl. So he left her. And about almost a year, he was without her. And finally, he got off the drugs. And when he got off the drugs, he suddenly, his feeling of intense romantic love for this woman came back. And so he, in his brain, and so he went off to a florist and bought himself as many roses as he could carry in his arms, and apparently went over to her house, knocked on the door, carrying all these roses, and said, "Would you take me back? I think it was the drugs." And she said yes. And so
Lucky
what?
Lucky him. She didn't move on.
Lucky him. Well, romantic love is a sticky substance. It's very difficult. That's one of the problems with rejection. You keep on loving the person. You get rejected by them, and sure enough, you can just love them harder, because any barrier in the relationship can actually make you like the person even more. In fact, what I learned from that study of rejection in love was that, and it was my hypothesis, that love is an addiction, a perfectly wonderful addiction when it's going well, and a perfectly horrible one when it's going poorly. And indeed, we found activity in 3 brain regions that are linked with profound addiction.
Wow. And see, this is what I have to ask you, though. I've got another question, but I'll leave that a little bit. Through all of your study, is anybody capable of romantic love with anybody who would potentially be a healthy partner? So therefore, you've read books where friends or neighbors who never even looked at each other that way all of a sudden said, why not? Let's give it a try. I've been through some pretty crappy relationships, and we're still friends, so let's try the romantic part. Or for instance, if somebody's listening right now who's with their best friend but doesn't have the romance in their life, they don't have that feeling in their life, can they cultivate it in any way?
Yes, I do. I think you can, and I might not have said that if it hadn't happened to me. I had just a good friend, and actually I thought he was a bit of a pest. I mean, he was constantly around, and I really just wasn't, I liked him very much, and he was very handsome, and he was very interesting, but for some reason nothing, and one day I fell in love with him, and I remained in love with him for many years. And so this brain system can be triggered at any time. But I think there's 2 things that you really ought to do if you want to, sorry, I'm getting such a cold. there's two things that I think that you could do to help to trigger the romance. One of them is go do novel things together. Any kind of novelty drives up the dopamine system in the brain and can have to push you over that threshold into falling in love. So I don't mean just swinging from chandeliers. I mean, taking a bike ride to a new part of town, going to new kinds of restaurants, trying a new movie, trying a new hobby together. Take a trip to Laos and Cambodia to see the sights without making any plans in advance. Any novelty can drive up the dopamine system and sustain or trigger feelings of intense romantic love. The other thing is having sex with that individual. Any kind of stimulation of the genitals, if you like the person, any kind of stimulation of the genitals drives up the dopamine system in the brain and can help to push you over that threshold into falling in love. And with orgasm, there's a real flood of oxytocin and vasopressin, other chemicals that are linked with feelings of deep attachment. This is why casual, and so you can feel not only intense romantic love for somebody after having sex with them, but also feelings of deep attachment after having sex with them. And this is why casual sex is really not casual, unless you're so drunk you can't remember it. Something goes on in the brain, and you're either turned on or turned off. So I guess to really stimulate what you really want to do in a relationship is stimulate all three brain systems. Have sex, which will not only drive up the dopamine system and the attachment system, but also can help to trigger more sex, because any kind of sexual activity actually drives up testosterone that is linked with the sex drive. So have sex with the person, cuddle with them, hold them, massage them, walk arm in arm, put your foot on top of theirs when you're having dinner out, sit right next to them in the car. Any kind of touch drives up oxytocin and can stimulate feelings of deep attachment. And, of course, go do novel things together.
I want to see if you remember a story that you had talked about in the one TED TV that you did. Do you remember the story of the rickshaw?
Yes.
Okay, I would like you to, could you tell that story? And then when you're finished, we'll go to a break and we'll come back and talk more. Do you remember the story?
Oh, of course, absolutely. I love this story.
You gotta say it. I love it too.
And well, it's a true story, first of all. Or I'm told it's true. Mm-hmm. It was my colleague, Art Aaron. He and I do our brain scanning together, and he had a graduate student who was madly in love with another graduate student, and they were all in Beijing at an academic conference. And the graduate student, young man, knew that going and doing novel things together can drive up the testosterone system in the brain and trigger feelings of intense romantic love. So he was madly in love with this young woman, also a graduate student, and she was not in love with him. So he decided that what he would do is take her on a rickshaw ride, and hopefully, the excitement and the danger and the novelty would drive up the dopamine system in her brain, and she'd fall in love with him. So she said, fine, I'll go with you, and off they went on the rickshaw ride, and they were gone for about an hour, and she was having a ball. She was squealing and grabbing his arm and laughing and throwing her head back, and he kept thinking to himself, this'll do it. It'll drive up the dopamine. She'll fall in love with me. So anyway, the hour ended, and they got back to the hotel, and they both leapt out of the rickshaw, and she threw up her arms and said, wasn't that wonderful? And wasn't that rickshaw driver handsome? So basically, you can drive up that brain system, but you can't count on the fact that chemistry will be directed towards you.
That's very interesting. Very interesting. I love that story. So we're talking to Dr. Helen Fisher, and we're going to talk more about the brain and sex and romantic love and everything else after this break. You are listening to the Holly Hall Show here at A to Zen.fm. Global news with an astrological twist. If you want to get a hold of me, I'd love to have you as a friend on Facebook at AstroHolly, or contact me at hollyhall@atozen.fm. We welcome your phone call, your questions, and comments. Please call now, 815-880-TALK. Come on, what's stopping you? 815-880-8255. You can Skype us for free from anywhere. Just add us to your Skype. a2zen.fm is our Skype name, or you can find the logo and click on it on our website. Call now at 815-880-TALK. Chat soon.
You're listening to A2Zen FM, life-altering talk radio. Anything from activism to Zen and everything in between, right here and now. Informative, inspiring, engaging. Our hosts provide you with the global news and educated advice you need to make a difference in your life, in your world. Knowledge is power. A2Zen.fm.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I was hoping for the What's Love. You know what, Clyde? Play What's Love's Got to Do with It. Can you play that now? I want to hear it.
Yeah, it won't play.
It won't play. Okay, that's fine.
I've played it over and over. Nothing.
It won't play. Okay, thanks. So that's okay. Guess it's not meant to be. We are talking to Helen Fisher from, Dr. Helen Fisher. You can find her on her website at helenfisher.com. I know that she does speaking engagements all over the place. She might be able to let you know where her next speaking engagements are. She has many on TED TV. All you have to do is Google TED TV and within the search Helen Fisher, you'll find all kinds of videos, very engaging. I love TED TV because it's only like, each one is only like 10, 15 minutes long. Sometimes some of them are only like 3 or 4 minutes long, and they give you wonderful bits of information. She's written 5 books: Why Him, Why Her, which I want to talk about next, Why We Love, The First Sex, and The Anatomy of Love, as well as The Sex Contract. Ooh, the evolution of human behavior. Let's start with that. When you had said earlier, Helen, that we are wanting to fall in love at least long enough to raise a child, most of divorces I find happen, including my own as a child. And because of that, I started looking and researching, and everyone's, if they're destined for divorce, happens when one of their children, usually the youngest, is around the age of 12, 13, which is kind of traumatic for the child because they're going through their own physical changes at the time. But it seems that that's when, I think on a psychological level, either the mother doesn't feel that she's needed anymore, and so the marriage sort of breaks up, or that's when they know their kids are fine, they're on their own. So it made me think, in the evolution of human behavior, there was a time when we married at 16. We died at the age of 40. We were grandparents at the age of 30. So is this an evolutionary thing that we feel that children are okay on their own at the age of 13?
Well, it could be. I've studied divorce in 58 societies through the demographic yearbooks of the United Nations because I really did want to know why it is that we divorced, and I really didn't feel, people make such an effort to marry and settle down and have homes and families and networks, and then to break up like that just seems so weird. And everywhere in the world where people can divorce, they do divorce. So I thought, maybe there are some biological or evolutionary patterns here. So I looked at the demographic yearbooks of the United Nations in 58 societies, and I found that if you're going to divorce, you tend to divorce during and around the 4th year of marriage, and often with one child, and often quite early in your mid-20s, and I thought that is strange. And so I basically then looked at pair bonding in birds and mammals. Very few mammals bother to pair up to rear their children as a team. Only 3% do. But among those that do, they tend to form a pair bond only long enough for the young through infancy. For example, foxes. A male and a female fox have to pair up because the female's milk is very thin, and she's got to stay in the den and feed those babies constantly. So if she's doing that, she'll starve to death, and so the male needs to feed her. But when the little foxes walk away in the middle of the summer, the pair bond breaks up. It only lasts long enough to rear the young through infancy. And when you take a look at all kinds of birds, a female robin, she's got to sit on those eggs, and she'll starve to death unless somebody feeds her. So male and female robin take turns sitting on the eggs and raise their babies as a team. But when the babies fly away, the baby robins fly away, the pair bond breaks up. So you see this pattern of serial monogamy, a series of pair bonds, remaining together only long enough to rear the young through infancy. And then it began to occur to me, this 4-year pattern in human beings, the tendency to divorce during and around the 4th year of marriage may be an ancient strategy millions of years ago when men and women needed to pair up to rear their young through infancy. Human infancy is about 4 years, and in a hunting and gathering societies, a child is certainly not on its own by age 4, but by age 4, 5, 6, they begin to join what they call a multi-age play group. And so 4-year-old, no longer nursing, can now be cared for by a 7-year-old and a 10-year-old and aunts and uncles and cousins, etc. So it's no longer essential for the parents to stay together to rear the young. So for millions of years, our ancestors probably paired up long enough to rear the young through infancy. If it was a good relationship, they stayed together longer. And of course, those that did break up had the opportunity to form a new pair bond, a new relationship with somebody else, thus creating more genetic variety in their young. And you can see that today. You see a woman who said, who'll say, well, I had 3 husbands during the course of my life. I had 1 child with the first husband. I had 2 children with the second husband, and I've created a very stable relationship with the third husband. And basically, what has this woman done? She's basically created a lot of genetic variety in her babies, and for millions of years, that was an adaptive strategy. So I do think that there is more and more data that there is some biology to divorce. This isn't to say that we're all going to divorce. I mean, over 50% of marriages people remain married for life. It's entirely possible to do it. But around the world, people do divorce, and they do it in these patterns.
Now, would you say from your research that the 50% of the people that remain married all have this romantic love that we all seek and that you talk about?
It's really hard to know because there's almost no studies of romantic love in long-term marriages. And the few studies that there are really shocking in that they are finding more and more long-term marriages in which the people say, yes, we actually are madly in love with each other. So it's amazing how scientists really haven't asked. But I also think these people are deeply attached to each other. That's a very strong brain system attachment. In fact, I've got a girlfriend who once really summed it up. She has a wonderful relationship with her husband, and she said, Helen, sometimes I hate him, but I always love him. And I think what she's saying is there's always that deep attachment. So my guess, in the long term, really good, healthy marriage, you have all 3 brain systems. You feel a sense of intense attachment to the person that is sustained even when you're fed up. The romantic love probably comes and goes along with feeling well and feeling happy and being on vacation and having on nice weekends or whatever. And the sex drive will come and go too. But all 3 brain systems will remain. But you got to pick the right person, and that's, I think, the rub. You got to pick the right person.
I think you got to pick the right person where both of you can be okay with the comes and the goes, the ebbs and the flows.
Yep.
I just find with society and everything now, we have this insatiable need to have everything always.
Right.
I
agree with you.
Always. We want to have great furniture always. We want to have the perfect kids always. We want the great relationships always. We want to be happy always. That's why I think 75%, as you said, of these people are taking drugs that don't have to because they somehow think they should be happy or at least not sad all the time.
Right. Well, what's amazing is that there's a whole trend these days to divorce somebody when you're no longer in love with them. Mm-hmm. Americans love love. We love romantic love. I think we're scared of the sex drive. And I don't think we've got much real respect. We talk a big game for deep feelings of attachment to somebody. And we're seeing more and more marriages break up because a man and woman will say, or men or women will say, well, I'm not in love with her anymore. Sure, I like her as a person. I've been attached to her, but I'm not in love with her. We want that intense exhilaration of romantic love. And, geez, I hope we get over it because, you can pick the right person and sustain it, but it's not going to be sustainable every day. As a matter of fact, in my book, Why We Love, I had to explain why is it that you can fall in love at any age. I mean, why is it that older people after the age of reproduction. Why do they still have this brain system? I mean, why doesn't it just sort of, decay in the brain? Why do we continue to fall in love even at age 50, 60, 70, and 80 when in fact we no longer need that brain system to start the pair bond, to start the relationship? And I do think it is in part to just sustain that electricity, but it is not adaptive to spend your entire life being intensely in love with your partner. I mean, in the raising of small children, you can't be racing around the dining room table after your partner. You got to have time for that baby. So
I wonder if sometimes at the age of at the 4 years of marriage, especially if they have children right away, if that's why a lot of people are divorcing. Because I think the first 3 to 4 years of raising a child is really, really difficult on a single person, no along two people. I think if you can survive that 4 years, just hang in there.
Yeah,
it would get better.
What's really, I agree with you. And of course, people are always so upset about divorce these days, but I think there's an even bigger problem. I mean, for millions of years, we lived in these little hunting and gathering groups, and a child had many mothers and many fathers and many aunts and uncles and other. Yeah, it was a village. It was a moving village. I mean, we live now in a world where it's not just, we're talking about single mothers. That's hard enough. But even for a pair bonded couple, I mean, most couples, the parents are the grandparents live in Florida, and the couple lives in New York or Minnesota. They don't. I actually traveled only for a week with a hunting gathering group of people in Tanzania, and when the mother was a little tired of the cranky baby, she handed it to somebody else who wasn't tired of the cranky baby.
I agree with you. Mm-hmm.
And it's hard enough for two, let alone one, when it really should be a village. What I'm more concerned about, I'm even more concerned about than the divorce rate, which is the lack of local community. We still have communities. We've got communities on the internet. We've got a community at work. We've got communities when we go play tennis or play golf or whatever. We've got communities, but they're not the local community. We can't hand our baby to them.
No, and I agree with you. I was single mom at 11. She was 11 months old, and I didn't have any family, any friends. I was fairly new in the area. I only had his family and his friends. So when he left, I didn't have his family or his friends. My mom lived 400 miles away.
Wow.
I didn't really know any neighbors. I was really fortunate to find this beautiful babysitter that lived down the street, and I adopted her.
Yeah, of course.
And she adopted me, and I just I will never forget that because she was my village.
Yeah.
My one little village.
Yeah. And just think, I mean, if you had 5 of her in your little village.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing is that, we're really not built to have more than one child under the age of 4. In hunting and gathering societies, after women have a baby, they get a great deal of exercise and they're very thin. And as a result, they don't tend to ovulate for maybe as much as 2 years. And it takes them a while to get pregnant. So we were built to have our children birth spacing about 4 years apart. And you see these women with 2 children under the age of 4, or even 3 children under the age of 4. We're really built to have a child every 4 years, or maybe even 5, or every 6 years, so that we never have 2 children in infancy at the same time. And that's a real added burden for women.
Yeah, I mean, mind you, I look back, and maybe that changed a bit, and that would have changed when the car came in, when we were able to have washing machines and dryers and the fridge, and you didn't have to farm outside. So probably starting in the 1900s, many of us will remember, at least my grandmother had 7 or 8 kids, and they were back to back.
Oh, yeah. Well, it really started probably with about 10,000 years ago with the evolution of farming, because once women began to get less exercise and have a really good food supply and put on a lot of fat, then you can ovulate much more regularly and have one child after another. And you see that actually in Roman times and a lot of times in history. So it's probably about 10,000 years old, this ability to have one baby after another.
But it's still sort of in our DNA, I guess.
Well, it's in our
think this
DNA to be able to, take advantage of having a lot of resources. If you got a lot of resources, then you're going to have a lot of babies right off the bat, because it's an adaptive mechanism to have your children. But you need support for those children. And in hunting and gathering societies, they just didn't have enough food. They got a lot of exercise. This inhibited ovulation, and they tended to have children 4 years apart. And that's what we're built for. That's what the human brain is built for.
It's interesting that you said that, because I was watching two shows back to back. Anyone who knows me, I overanalyze everything. And the first show was a reality show with all of these rich women and these rich kids who are all being raised by nannies, and if they were raised by their moms, they were raised by their moms running around with their chicken with their heads cut off, trying to act rich all the time. And then right after that, I watched a show where it was about the projects, and it was in this case it was a lot of black people in the projects, and yet there was a community there. They were in each other's homes. They were grabbing each other's kids and watching them while they ran off and did a little bit of work or had to run to the store or whatever, and their homes were really close together and really small. And I was like, a part of me said, now wonder it's difficult for them to get out of that situation, because why a part of you wouldn't want to?
They have much that the rich do not have.
Yeah,
they really do have much that. I have a girlfriend who came recently from Ecuador, and at Christmas she has 50 people for Christmas. Now I couldn't scare up 50 people for Christmas. I mean, my family is, they live in Europe, they live all over the place. I mean, I'm basically alone unless I have, drifters coming in for, single people who don't have anywhere to go. So, there's much to be said for the poor. I mean, they're rich in some social ways that the rich are not rich in.
Yeah.
In fact, I grew up in a community where, everybody lived in a big house on top of a hill, far from each other, nobody to call when you needed help, nobody to handle your children unless you paid them, et cetera. So, I think you got a very good point there.
Yeah, and I think if we really look at it, as North Americans, I'm from Canada, but even then, sometimes we forget that there's a world out there outside of us. And there's a huge chunk of civilization that doesn't live the way we live.
Oh, my goodness, yes.
And you've done studies on that. So when you go to more tribal civilizations or smaller community civilizations that are kind of like it used to be in the good old days, as they speak, do you find that marriage or relationships, or there's healthier relationships in those societies compared to us?
Oh, it's interesting. There's probably not. I haven't done any extensive work on that. It's a very interesting question. But I just remember there's a hunting and gathering society in Botswana. They're called the Kung Bushmen. And the murder rate is exactly the same among the Kung Bushmen, and these are hunter-gatherers, as in downtown Houston.
Wow.
And because the human brain is jealous. I mean, we get jealous. And in those societies, just like in the modern world, people get rejected in love. People get jealous because somebody's sleeping with somebody else. People are adulterous. They've got the same sorts of problems that we do in our modern world. And they, and they've got the same murder rate, literally the same murder rate as downtown Houston. So
right. I could see that actually now that you've said it too, because there is this side of us that how many people probably can think of an ex that if it was okay they might have murdered them.
Boy, there was one guy I wanted to murder. I'm so glad I didn't do it because, no question about it. And most of us would probably like to stalk. But fortunately, we have enough impulse control that we don't do it. And, most of the time when you've been rejected in love, you want to know, where is he? Where is she? What went on? Is he with somebody else? What's going on here? But a person who's well-balanced, controls themselves and doesn't do it. And people, of course, who've got poor impulse control get themselves into terrible trouble. The amount of crimes of passion over romantic love is absolutely staggering. As a matter of fact, I was once at a neuroscience convention, and a very well-known neuroscientist said to me, he said, Helen, I wouldn't be surprised if more people die because of issues in romantic love than die of cancer. Now, who's to know about anything like that? But the bottom line is crimes of passion are common everywhere in the world. They're common in hunting-gathering societies. They're common in agrarian societies. They're common in industrial societies and post-industrial societies. I mean, nobody gets out of love alive. I mean, we all have our problems. Most of us can contain ourselves. We're not so narcissistic that we follow people around and make life difficult for others. But we all suffer. We all suffer at some point, and we all feel the joy of it. I read poetry from around the world, and everywhere in the world, people saying the same things about romantic love. The oldest love poems are almost 4,000 years old, and they're saying exactly the same things that our modern love songs are saying.
You're right. I'm writing an ebook with a friend of mine on soulmates, and we talk about the old stories, the Romeo and Juliet type stories, the Aesop and I can't remember the other name, but yeah, a lot of it was with the poetry, and they actually didn't have much time together, but they wrote a lot of poetry to each other.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of this deep romantic and love, and like you said, the songs and the movies that we watch. But at the same time, I think it's important for people to understand that you can't stay that high all of the time.
Right. Not only that, but
it's
you
not
really,
healthy.
when you realistically think about it, you really don't want to. You wouldn't get to work. You wouldn't feed the cat. You wouldn't visit your parents. You can't live on 3 hours of sleep every night while you're kidding and hugging and, skipping everything so that you can, come home and see him at lunchtime. It's not adaptive to have. I mean, it's a very intense state, romantic love, and then
adaptive. You're going to crash and burn, right? So.
Yeah, hopefully you will move into a very nice, steady, solid, deep attachment with periodic feelings of that intensity.
Right, exactly. And I think it's very healthy for people to think that way and to expect, as one of my other famous philosophers says, expect an ordinary day and see what happens. So
that's very good.
Yeah, expect an ordinary relationship, and when something happens, it'll be wonderful. I want to thank you so much for being on the show, Helen. I've been honored to have you on. Your work is incredible, and I want people to follow you around. So could you give us an idea of how they can find you? When is your next speaking engagement, etc.?
Oh, great. Well, wonderful. My next speaking engagement is in Shanghai next Wednesday.
Okay, I can't be there. Sorry.
No, can't be there. It'll be hard for me to get there myself. But anyway, thank you, Holly. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you very much. So you can contact Helen at helenfisher.com /books. You can find where her work is. I'm sure you can find it on Amazon too if you go to Helen Fisher. And of course, if you go to TED TV, and I'm telling you, if you go to TED TV, they literally get if you've got an Xbox, if you can get a hold of Netflix, I think that's one of the providers that has TED TV. I'm completely addicted to them. That's how I found Helen Fisher and many of the wonderful speakers out there. If you want to get a grasp on reality of what's going on in the world on all different levels, anywhere from bugs to romantic relationships, as Helen is speaking of, go to TED TV and you'll find many speakers like helenfisher.com. I've been really honored to have her on my show. This will be ready for the pod room very shortly. You're going to want to listen to it again and again because she's got an amazing amount of information about romantic love and the brain on love. You can even find other videos as well on YouTube and on her website at helenfisher.com. So we're going to try to end this, the Holly Hall Show here at A to Zen.fm with What's Love Got to Do with It? That's another interesting song by Tina Turner. Maybe not. Okay, it's not going to work. I guess I'm not allowed to have Tina Turner on my show today. Some royalty rights they're keeping from me. So that's okay. Anyway, thanks for listening to the Holly Hall Show. Good night, everyone.